Professor Veltar's hands shook slightly as he checked his protective equipment one more time. The thick metal walls of the xenobiology classroom hummed with energy from multiple safety systems, all designed to keep the students safe from what waited in the center of the room. He had taught this class for over 30 years, introducing students to dangerous creatures from across the galaxy, but the Crithian Shadowstalker still made his skin crawl. The containment unit stood like a fortress in the middle of the classroom. Inside the transparent aluminum walls, something dark moved with deadly grace. The Shadowstalker was a nightmare made real, 8 feet of pure killing machine, covered in black armor-like skin that seemed to absorb light. Its claws could slice through steel like paper, and the strange glowing marks along its body pulsed with an evil red light that meant only one thing: it was ready to hunt. Students, what you see before you is death itself. Professor Veltar began, his voice coming out strange and robotic through his breathing mask. The Crithian Shadowstalker has wiped out entire colonies. Military units flee when they detect even one of these creatures on a planet. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Every alien student in the room scrambled backward, like their lives depended on it. The plant-like Xanthari students clustered together in the far corner, their green leaf arms wrapped around each other for comfort. Their whole bodies trembled like trees in a storm. The fish-like Miralyn students had already activated their emergency water suits and hidden behind the blast-proof shields along the walls. Even the brave Carillion students, known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture, had moved to the back rows and were gripping their desks with white knuckles. But one student didn't move. James Mitchell sat in the front row, like he was watching a nature documentary. The human from Earth had his old paper notebook out, who even used paper anymore, and was actually writing things down. His brown hair fell slightly over his eyes as he leaned forward to get a better look at the monster, while everyone else in the room was barely breathing from fear. James looked interested, like he was studying a puzzle he wanted to solve. The Shadowstalkers suddenly slammed against the energy barrier, with a sound like thunder. Several students screamed. The creature's claws scraped against the invisible wall, sending sparks flying. Its glowing marks flared brighter, casting evil shadows across the classroom walls. This was the moment when most students either fainted or ran for the emergency exits. James just tilted his head slightly and made another note. Professor Veltar stared at the human in complete shock. In 3 decades of teaching, he had never seen any student remain calm during their first encounter with a Shadowstalker. Even experienced soldiers showed fear. But this young human acted like he was watching a slightly interesting movie. "Mr. Mitchell," the professor called out, his voice cracking with worry. "I really think you should move back with the other students. The containment field is strong, but these creatures are unpredictable." James looked up from his notebook with genuine confusion on his face. "Move back? But why? I thought you said the barrier was rated for Classa predators. This is clearly a Classa, so we should be fine, right?" He gestured casually toward the nightmare creature still prowling just a few feet away. "Besides, I'm getting some really good observations from here. Look at how it moves. There's a definite pattern to its pacing." The other students exchanged horrified looks. Was this human completely insane? Did he not understand what he was looking at? Professor Veltar felt his world turning upside down. "Mr. Mitchell, that creature could kill everyone in this room in less than 30 seconds, if it escaped." "Oh, I'm sure it could," James agreed cheerfully, turning back to watch the Shadowstalker. "But it's not trying to escape, is it? Look at its body language, the pacing, the claw displays, the light patterns. It's doing territorial marking behavior. It's basically saying, 'This is my space, stay out.' Pretty standard stuff for apex predators." "Standard?" Professor Veltar's voice came out as a squeak. James nodded, completely missing the terror in his teacher's voice. "Yeah, my neighbor back home has a dog that does the exact same thing with their backyard fence. Big German Shepherd, probably. Weighs about as much as I do. Same aggressive display, same pacing pattern. Once you understand what they're actually communicating, it's not really threatening at all. The silence in the classroom was so complete, you could hear the air recycling systems. Every alien student was staring at James like he had just claimed he could juggle black holes. Professor Velter's breathing apparatus wheezed as he tried to process what he was hearing. You're comparing a shadow stalker to a domestic animal? Well, the behavioral patterns are similar, James said thoughtfully, watching as the creature settled into a more relaxed posture. Different species, same basic predator psychology. They're usually more afraid of us than we are of them. At that moment, every alien in the room realized they might be sharing their classroom with something far more dangerous than any The Shadow Stalker's attack came without warning. One moment it was pacing calmly, the next it launched itself at the containment wall with the force of a speeding hover car. The impact shook the entire classroom. Tables rattled, chairs fell over, and the lights flickered as electricity coursed through the creature's body and into the barrier system. Several Xanthare students let out high-pitched screams that sounded like air being let out of balloons. They dove under their desks, their leaf-like arms covering their heads. One Mirland student was so startled that water shot out of his emergency suit, creating a puddle on the floor. Even the tough Carillion warriors jumped backward, their warrior training kicking in as they reached for weapons that weren't there. Red emergency lights began spinning around the room, casting everything in an evil glow. A computerized voice echoed from the speakers. Warning. Containment stress detected. All students remain calm. Systems operating within normal parameters. But James Mitchell did something nobody expected. He leaned forward, while every other living being in the room was either hiding or preparing to run. The human actually moved closer to the monster. He had his pen ready and was writing in his notebook like a reporter at a sports game. Incredible, James said to himself, his eyes bright with excitement. Look at that technique. Pure intimidation display. See how it hit the barrier but didn't actually try to claw through it. And watch the electrical discharge. It's not random. There's a pattern to it. Professor Veltar felt like his brain was melting. The human was analyzing the attack like it was some kind of science experiment. Mr. Mitchell, that creature just tried to kill us all. No, it didn't, James replied, still watching the Shadow Stalker with fascination. If it wanted to break out, it would have targeted the weakest point in the containment system. Instead, it hit the center, where the barrier is strongest. This is just show-off behavior. My neighbor's Rottweiler does the exact same thing when strangers walk past their yard. The professor's translation device made several confused beeping sounds. Your neighbor's, what did you say? Rottweiler. It's a type of dog from Earth. Big black and brown animal. About 130 pounds of pure muscle. Massive head, huge teeth. Bred originally for guarding and protection work. James smiled fondly like he was talking about a favorite pet. Sweetest animal you'd ever meet, once you earn its respect. But wow, can it put on a scary show when it wants to? Professor Veltar's legs felt weak. The translator was working perfectly, but the words coming out made no sense. Are you telling me that on your planet, you keep creatures like this as ... companions? Well, Rotties are on the gentler side, James said casually. Now, if you want to talk about really impressive animals, you should see what lives wild back home. I spent 3 summers doing wildlife photography in Yellowstone National Park. That's where you really learn to read animal behavior. Wildlife photography. The professor could barely get the words out. James nodded enthusiastically. Oh yeah, it's amazing work. You hike out into the wilderness with just your camera and camping gear. Then you track down the most dangerous predators on the continent. Grizzly bears that weigh 800 pounds and can run faster than a hover bike. Mountain lions that can leap 40 feet and kill an elk with one bite. Wolf packs that hunt in perfect coordination. Around the classroom, alien students were staring at James like he had just admitted to being a serial killer. Their translators were working fine, but their minds couldn't process what they were hearing. You voluntarily went looking for these creatures, a Xanthari student whispered. Had to, James replied matter-of-factly. You can't get good photos from a distance. I learned to read their body language, understand their hunting patterns, respect their territory. Once you know what to look for, you can tell the difference between a curious bear and an aggressive one. Same with the big cats. They'll usually give you plenty of warning before they decide you're a threat. Professor Veltar felt faint. How many of your species engage in this insane behavior? James thought about it. Wildlife photography. Maybe a few thousand professionals worldwide. But hiking and camping in predator territory. Millions of people do that for fun every year. We call it vacation. The shadow stalker had calmed down and was back to its normal pacing, but now it seemed to be watching James with what looked almost like curiosity. Its glowing marks had shifted from angry red to a cooler blue-green. See that? James pointed excitedly. Color change in the bioluminescence. It's shifting from aggressive display to neutral observation mode. Classic predator behavior. It's trying to figure out what I am. Back home, I've seen wolves do the same thing when they encounter something new in their territory. A student raised a trembling fin. On your planet, do the predators ever win? James looked confused. Win what? Oh, you mean do they ever hurt people? Sure, sometimes. Couple dozen people get killed by bears each year, maybe the same number by mountain lions. Sharks get a few swimmers, venomous snakes bite some hikers. But you're talking about a planet with 8 billion humans on it. The odds are incredibly small, and this doesn't terrify your entire species. Professor Veltar asked weakly. Terrify us? James laughed. Professor, these animals are why we go camping. Half the fun is knowing there's something out there that could eat you if you're not careful. Makes you feel alive, you know? The classroom fell into stunned silence. Every alien student was beginning to understand that they weren't just sharing space with a human, they were sitting next to something that voluntarily hunted the hunters for entertainment. The feeding time bell chimed through the classroom, and Professor Veltar immediately began his careful preparations. He pulled on his thick environmental suit, piece by piece, checking each seal and connection. The suit was designed to protect against acid, electricity, claws, teeth, and pretty much any other horrible way a dangerous creature might try to kill you. Next came the breathing apparatus, then the reinforced helmet with its thick face shield. Students observed the proper safety protocols, the professor announced, his voice now sounding like it was coming from inside a metal can. When feeding Classa predators, we maintain a minimum safe distance of 50 meters. The robotic feeding system allows us to deliver nutrition without any risk to ourselves. The feeding machine was an impressive piece of engineering. It looked like a small tank with mechanical arms, designed to roll up to the containment unit, drop in the food pellets, and retreat quickly. The whole process was controlled from a safe bunker-like booth at the far end of the classroom. Professor Veltar had used this system hundreds of times without incident. But as he began powering up the machinery, a human voice interrupted his routine. I can help with that, James said cheerfully, standing up from his seat and rolling up the sleeves of his simple cotton shirt. The professor's helmet nearly fell off his head in shock. Absolutely not. Mr. Mitchell, Standard Academy protocol requires full environmental protection and remote feeding procedures for all class of specimens. James was already walking toward the containment unit. Look, Professor, I've been watching this poor thing for the last hour, and it's obviously stressed out. See how it keeps pacing in that same tight pattern? And look at its bioluminescence. Those lights have been flickering on and off like a broken sign. This is classic anxiety behavior in confined predators. Mr. Mitchell, stop moving. Professor. Veltar's voice cracked with panic. You're violating every safety regulation in the Academy handbook. But James was already studying the Shadowstalker with the focused attention of someone solving a puzzle. It's probably not eating properly either. Stressed animals often refuse food, which makes them more aggressive and unpredictable. I bet if we approach this differently, we could help it settle down. Before anyone could react, James had walked right up to within 10 feet of the containment field. The distance that Professor Veltar maintained with a full robot suit. James covered in regular clothes with no protection at all. The Shadowstalker's reaction was immediate and terrifying. Its head snapped toward James like a guided missile, locking onto a target. Every muscle in the creature's body tensed, ready to strike. The red lights along its body flared brighter than they had all day, casting evil shadows across the walls. Its claws extended with a sound like swords being drawn from metal sheaths. Every alien student in the room held their breath, waiting for the inevitable attack that would leave nothing but a bloody smear where the crazy human had been standing. But James did something completely unexpected. He stood perfectly still, not frozen with fear, but deliberately, consciously still. His breathing stayed calm and steady. His hands hung relaxed at his sides. He looked directly at the Shadowstalker, but not in a challenging way, more like he was having a conversation with it. Then he started talking, not to the professor or his classmates, but to the creature itself. "Easy there, big guy," James said in a low, gentle voice that somehow carried clearly through the room. "I know you're having a rough day. Being locked up is no fun. Especially when you're used to having the whole galaxy as your hunting ground." The Shadowstalker's head tilted slightly, like it was trying to understand what this strange creature was doing. "Nobody here is trying to challenge you," James continued in that same calm tone. "I'm just bringing you some dinner. I bet you're hungry, and probably tired of all the excitement today." The most incredible thing began to happen. Fierce red glow along the Shadowstalker's body started to fade. The harsh, angry color shifted slowly to a cooler blue-green. The creature's aggressive posture began to relax, its claws retracting slightly, as an Anthari student let out a tiny whisper that somehow echoed through the silent classroom. "How is he doing that?" James glanced back with a small smile, never fully turning away from the predator. Same basic principles work on most dangerous animals. You show confidence without being aggressive. Respect without showing fear. It's all about body language and tone of voice. Professor Veltar felt like his understanding of the universe was crumbling. That's impossible. These creatures respond only to strength and dominance. Actually, they respond to understanding, James replied, still keeping most of his attention on the I worked 3 summers at a big cat sanctuary in Colorado. Lions, tigers, leopards, all of them supposedly man-eating monsters. But once you learn to read their signals and communicate properly, they're just large animals with their own personalities and needs. The creature had now completely relaxed its attack posture. It was watching James with what looked almost like curiosity rather than hunger. "See, most predatory behavior isn't really about being mean or vicious," James explained, slowly reaching for the feeding controls. "It's about fear, territory, and survival. This guy is scared, confused, and probably homesick. He doesn't want to hurt anyone, he just wants to feel safe." As James activated the feeding system, the Shadowstalker actually moved closer to the food dispenser. Its bioluminescent patterns now showing a soft, almost peaceful glow. Every alien in the room realized they were witnessing something that would change their understanding of both predators and humans forever. The piercing wail of emergency sirens shattered the peaceful quiet of the sleeping Academy at 3:47 in the morning. Red warning lights flashed through every corridor like angry lightning, and the automated voice system began its urgent announcements in 12 different languages. Emergency lockdown initiated. All personnel report to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. In the xenobiology lab, sparks flew from damaged control panels, where a massive power surge had fried the containment systems. The reinforced cage that had held the Shadow Stalker now stood empty, its energy barriers flickering weakly before going dark completely. Somewhere in the maze of air ducts and maintenance tunnels that ran through the academy like arteries, 8 feet of deadly predator was now roaming free. Security Chief Terran rushed into the command center, his uniform hastily thrown over his sleeping clothes. The main screen showed a 3-dimensional map of the academy with dozens of red dots marking security teams, sensor drones, and monitoring stations. But nowhere could they locate their escaped prisoner. Status report. Terran barked at his technical officer. Sir, the creature broke containment at 0-3-40-5. Initial tracking shows it entered the ventilation system through an access panel in the lab. We've deployed thermal sensors, motion detectors, and sent trackers throughout the facility. Terran studied the readouts with growing concern. The academy housed over 3,000 students from 47 different worlds. If that monster reached the dormitory levels, lock down everything, he ordered. Seal all sections. Deploy armed response teams to every critical junction, and get those students to safety now. Throughout the academy, emergency doors slammed shut with thunderous bangs. Students stumbled from their beds, confused and frightened, as academy staff herded them toward reinforced emergency shelters. The shelters were designed to protect against everything from toxic gas leaks to asteroid impacts, with thick walls and independent life support systems. In Emergency Shelter 7, about 60 students huddled together in the cramped space. Most were still in their sleeping clothes, looking around with wide, frightened eyes. The Xanthari students had clustered into tight groups, their leaves rustling nervously. The aquatic Miralin had activated their emergency breathing apparatus, filling the shelter with the smell of processed seawater. James sat calmly in one corner, fully dressed despite the early hour, while his classmates whispered nervously to each other. He listened carefully to the security reports coming through the shelter's communication system. Team Alpha, searching Deck 5. No visual contact. Thermal imaging shows heat signature. Moving through ventilation. Shaft 7-7 Charlie. All teams be advised. Target is highly aggressive and extremely dangerous. Shoot on sight orders are in effect. James frowned as he listened to the chatter. The security teams were using words like target and neutralize and hostile threat. They were treating the Shadow Stalker like some kind of evil monster that needed to be destroyed. He stood up and walked over to the communication console, where Security Chief Terran's voice was coordinating the search. Chief Terran, James spoke into the microphone. This is James Mitchell, student ID 7-7-9-4. I'd like permission to help with the search operation. There was a pause before Terran's incredulous voice came back. Negative, Mr. Mitchell. All civilians are to remain in secure locations until this threat is eliminated. Sir, with respect, I don't think your teams understand what they're dealing with, James replied calmly. This isn't a monster on a killing spree. It's a confused, frightened animal that's lost in an unfamiliar environment. Mr. Mitchell, that confused animal could kill dozens of people before we contain it. James pressed the communication button again. Only if you keep chasing it with armed teams and loud equipment. Look at your own sensor data. It's been moving away from populated areas, not toward them. It's trying to hide, not hunt. Several students had gathered around James, listening to his conversation with the security chief with amazement and horror. Your point being, Terran's voice came back, clearly annoyed. My point is that your hunting parties are probably making it more scared and aggressive. All that noise, all those weapons, all those bright lights, to the Shadow Stalker, this looks like a massive coordinated attack. It's going to go into full survival mode. And what exactly do you propose? Mr. Mitchell. James took a deep breath. Let me track it. No weapons, no heavy equipment, no backup teams. Just me, moving quietly, treating it like what it is, a scared animal that wants to go home. The communication channel went silent for several seconds. When Terran's voice returned, it sounded like he was talking to someone who had lost their mind. You want to hunt a shadow stalker? With what weapons? James looked down at his empty hands and smiled. These, and about 20 years of experience dealing with frightened animals, sometimes the best weapon against a scared predator is understanding. Absolutely not. That's suicide. But James was already moving toward the emergency maintenance hatch in the corner of the shelter. The same kind of access panel that maintenance workers use to move through the Academy's service tunnels. Mr. Mitchell, stand down immediately. James paused at the hatch and looked back at his terrified classmates. Don't worry, he said with a confidence that seemed completely insane under the circumstances. I'll bring him back safely. Before anyone could stop him, James had opened the hatch and disappeared into the dark tunnel beyond. The last thing his classmates heard was his voice echoing back through the opening. Besides, he's probably more scared than we are. In the command center, Security Chief Terran stared at his monitors in disbelief. Now he had two problems: a loose shadow stalker and an apparently suicidal human student crawling through the ventilation system after it. What he didn't realize was that James Mitchell was about to teach the entire galaxy a new way to think about predators. While security teams crashed through the Academy corridors with their heavy boots and flashing lights, James moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost. He had turned off his communicator and ignored the increasingly frantic calls from Security Chief Terran. Instead, he used skills that no alien species had ever thought to develop: the ancient human art of tracking. The ventilation shafts told a story that the fancy sensors had missed completely. James ran his fingers along the metal walls, feeling for the tiny scratches that claws would leave. He found gouges in the soft aluminum where the shadow stalker had scrambled for grip while climbing. In some places, he could even see the faint impressions where its feet had pressed against the ductwork. But more importantly, James listened. While the security teams made enough noise to wake the dead, he moved in complete silence, straining his ears for the subtle sounds that prey animals learn to detect: the soft whisper of breathing, the tiny scrape of claws adjusting position, the almost inaudible rustle of movement. It took him 3 hours of patient tracking, crawling through narrow spaces that would have been impossible for anyone wearing bulky protective gear. His clothes were torn and dirty by the time he finally heard what he was looking for: the sound of labored, stressed breathing coming from somewhere ahead in the darkness. James followed the sound to a dead-end maintenance shaft, barely wide, enough for the shadow stalker to fit inside. The creature had squeezed itself into the furthest corner possible, as far away from the chaos of the search as it could manage. When James's small flashlight finally illuminated the space, what he saw broke his heart. The mighty predator that had terrified an entire classroom was curled up like a scared puppy. Its powerful body was compressed into a tight ball, trying to make itself as small as possible. The bright, aggressive lights that had pulsed along its body were now dim and flickering weakly, like a dying battery. Its breathing was quick and shallow, the universal signs of an animal in extreme distress. "Hey there, big guy," James whispered softly, keeping his voice barely above a breath. "That's been pretty scary out there with all those loud noises and bright lights, hasn't it?" The shadow stalker's massive head lifted slightly, and James saw something that no security camera had ever recorded: intelligence in those alien eyes. Not the mindless hunger of a monster, but the aware, frightened gaze of a thinking creature that was completely lost and overwhelmed. Instead of the aggressive display James had seen in the classroom, the creature just watched him. Its body language spoke of exhaustion, confusion, and something that looked remarkably like hope. "I bet you just want to go home," James continued, settling into a comfortable position a few feet away. This whole place must seem like a nightmare. To you, all these strange smells, weird sounds, and now everyone's running around shouting and waving weapons. The Shadowstalker made a soft sound that James had never heard before. Not a growl or a roar, but something almost like a whimper. I know the way back to your room, James said gently. It's much quieter there. No sirens, no bright lights, no people with guns, and I bet you're pretty hungry by now. There's real food waiting for you. Slowly, carefully, James began backing away from the dead-end tunnel. He moved with deliberate, non-threatening motions, keeping his voice low and reassuring. Come on, I'll show you the way. No rush, we'll take it slow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, incredibly, the began to move, not with the deadly grace of a predator stalking prey, but with the hesitant steps of an animal learning to trust. The journey back took over an hour, with James patiently leading the way through the maze of tunnels. Every time the creature seemed nervous or uncertain, James would stop and wait, speaking quietly until it felt ready to continue. He never made sudden movements, never raised his voice, never did anything that might be interpreted as threatening. When they finally emerged into the xenobiology lab, the Shadowstalker went straight to its containment unit like it was coming home after a long, difficult day. The force fields flickered back to life, but now they seemed less like a prison and more like a safe haven. Security Chief Taryn and his teams arrived just in time to see James sitting cross-legged outside the containment unit, chatting casually with the creature as it finally ate the meal it had missed during all the excitement. That's impossible, Professor Veltar whispered, as he stared at the peaceful scene. How did you know it wouldn't kill you? James looked up with a tired but satisfied smile. Same reason I know my cat won't scratch me when I find her hiding under the bed during a thunderstorm. When predators are scared, they don't attack, they defend. They're looking for safety, not a fight. You just have to show them that you understand what they need. The professor shook his head in amazement. But the academic literature clearly states that Shadowstalkers are aggressive by nature. Maybe because everyone who studied them before was wearing armor and carrying weapons, James suggested. Hard to see an animal's true personality when you're treating it like a monster from the start. Word of the incident spread throughout the academy faster than gossip at a family reunion. Within days, representatives from universities across the galaxy were requesting meetings with the human student, who had accomplished something that had never been recorded in scientific literature. A week later, James found himself sitting in the dean's office, being offered something that had never existed before: enrollment in a brand new program called Extreme Xeno. It was the first course of study designed specifically around human capabilities rather than human limitations. Your first assignment, the dean explained, will be to develop peaceful contact protocols for the galaxy's most dangerous species. We want to see if your methods work with other creatures that we've previously considered too aggressive to study safely. James grinned as he accepted the offer. I'd be happy to help. After all, most of the galaxy's monsters are probably just misunderstood animals who need someone to listen to what they're really trying to say. As news of the program spread, applications began pouring in from other human students across the galaxy. It seemed that James Mitchell wasn't the only member of his species who thought the best way to deal with a dangerous predator was to try to understand it first. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most effective weapon against fear is simply knowing how to be a friend.